We are what we practice, and a lot of people don't practice pleasure or like practice being an erotic being. And what I mean by eroticism is like what makes you feel alive and connected to your senses, and then maybe they get in the bedroom and they're like, oh, why aren't I responding sexually, or why aren't I accessing pleasure? Well, we're not really on and off switch.
On today's conversation, we're joined by Alissa Hansen and got into unlocking deeper pleasure, ditching shame, and why your body's...
Sexologist Jack Morin created a theory, core erotic theme. He states that unresolved or challenging aspects from childhood can get eroticized as an adult to unconsciously try to resolve them.
Whoa.
How we are in life translates to how we are in the bedroom.
Is there anything you would direct people to explore in particular to answer some of those struggles that people experience in long-term relationships?
Yeah, something I was
Back to this week's CATAMANIA episode. I have with me here today Miss Alissa Hansen, who is an intimacy and pleasure, somatic intimacy and pleasure coach. Missed the word there. And I don't know if I should advise my parents if they're going to be watching this to turn off the cameras. I don't know, or turn off the episode. Maybe not. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. But I'm really excited to explore this subject. I chatted with Alissa's partner before that, which was really fun, about relationships and therapy and various different things that relate to relationships, conflict, all that kind of stuff. I want to remind you all to please comment. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, make sure you do that. You're already listening to this. You might as well subscribe. Do whatever you can do to support this podcast. It means more than you know. Without further ado, Miss Alissa Hansen, hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
I did a brief introduction, but if you don't mind diving into how you got to where you are and how you embarked on the journey of doing what you do.
Oh my gosh. I feel like this could be a really long answer, so I'll try and Coles Notes it. Yeah, I mean, I guess the pivotal moment of when I decided to go and I knew I wanted to become a facilitator in the sexology space was, I was in a long-term relationship in my 20s, from 22 to 28. He unfortunately passed away. Him and two of my friends passed away in a tragic accident. And that moment, the shock of the death was awful. Mm-hmm. And the shock trauma did a lot to my system. But what happened was, pretty much everything unresolved in my life got activated. Up until that point, I hadn't done any personal work, any therapy. I was very spiritual and liked angel cards and saw psychics, but I needed therapy and I hadn't done it yet to that point. So, for a year, I drank alcohol and smoked cigarettes and just coped and was in a lot of emotional pain. And then I got together with that guy, Nick, who you just interviewed. And he was very much involved in personal work for over a decade. And we were also in the same community. So we connected through mutual friends. And we both knew we wanted to be in what's called a conscious relationship. So to me, it means we wanted to be awake. And we didn't want to engage unconsciously with each other. We wanted to, let's heal, let's wake up, let's grow together. So, inevitably, I was forced to face everything that I had been suppressing the year after my previous partner died. And, pretty much after the honeymoon phase faded, I don't know, it would have been a couple months or a few months, I started to notice I had a lot of pain during sex. And also, I had issues with candida. There was just all of these symptoms, physical symptoms showing up. And that led me down this whole track of why I'm experiencing pain. So, I mean, I went down the Tantra route. I was reading books. I was sticking a jade egg up there. I was just trying everything and anything. And then finally, I found an incredible body worker who was able to actually support me and support my pelvis. And we were able to uncover what was going on. I was experiencing actually nerve pain. So I worked with a sexological body worker for about a year and a half, and we did tons of internal work together. And through all of that, I realized that I really care and I really am interested in sexology and sexuality, because through that I was also, doing my own self-inquiry about my sexuality and pleasure, my relationship to pleasure. And I was so focused on it, it really became all I thought about, all I talked about. And so I realized that I think I really want to give back in this space. So that's what led me to take my certificate. And I'm just starting my business this year. So, yeah.
Exciting. That's awesome. So I'm catching you at the start of your solo journey in that area.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes,
that's
you are.
awesome.
Yeah.
It's an area that I don't think a lot of people even have the courage to explore, Why do you think that is?
Oh my gosh. I think, honestly, so many reasons. I mean, first of all, I think as a society, just sex is still very taboo. And I think, we can look at religion, we can look at family systems, media, society. I think there's lots of different messaging, our peers around sex, where it's not okay to be sexual. It's not okay to talk about sex. We definitely don't talk about sex with our friends or at the dinner table or with our family. There's just this overarching message, I think. It is shifting, but definitely historically where, it's not okay.
Yeah.
It's not okay, especially for women too. It's not okay to feel pleasure. It's not okay to enjoy sex. And I think there's many, like I mentioned, like many different reasons why that has become like embedded in our culture and in our society, unfortunately. And to that point, like that's partly why I feel so passionate about wanting to normalize it and let's talk about it and finding the okayness in that. Like it's okay to be sexual. It's okay to have sexual thoughts or like sex or be interested in pleasure. And it does make me sad that there is so much, even like we're talking about with Instagram, like you can't say many different words. You can't say sex. You can't talk about genitals. However, then there's this polarity where, I used to model a lot, and there's nude photos of me on my Instagram. If you scroll back, I don't know if I should be advertising that. But I mean, I sure wasn't getting flagged then. And then for some reason, now I'm getting flagged. So there is, there's still a lot of, I think, unpacking to do around the taboo-ness of sex.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You were a gymnast before, you were saying.
Yeah.
I want to learn a little bit about that. Let's dive back into that. You must be very flexible.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was a rhythmic gymnast. So that's with like the ribbon and the ball, the hoop, the clubs.
Oh, that's so cool.
It's huge in Eastern Europe.
Huge, yeah.
Huge. So I was a rhythmic gymnast from the ages of 7 to 17. And, a part of also kind of unpacking my journey is being so interested in sexuality is being a high-level athlete. I learned how to bypass like what my body needs, what my body wants in order to perform, to kind of be a soldier. And, training was torturous.
Right.
I got to a level where I was competing for Canada and we were trying to make it to the 2008 Olympics. Unfortunately, there were so many politics, as there are. Yeah. And we, they say we got screwed, and I think we did. There was all these backdoor deals happening with the judges. And apparently a bunch of those judges were banned from actually judging at that Olympics because of that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But when I remember our scores came up at Worlds, it was in Greece, and we found out that we had just missed the spot to go to the Olympics. And I remember actually feeling relief because of, I don't regret my journey as an athlete. Like I got to travel all over Europe, all over the world. But training wasn't fun, and there were so many politics and so much BS that was also happening that made the sport like so not fun. I was ready to move on. They wanted us to continue to 2011, but
You've had enough?
Had enough, yeah.
How did you train? I want to zone into that subject because I'm so passionate about it, but you know, you said that you trained your body to be a soldier. How? Like, because first day of my period is a day that I often think about professional athletes. And I know that there's like a lot of adrenaline and you might not notice it, but I genuinely feel like if I had to do any physical work on the first day of my cycle, I wouldn't be able to. Like, I'm so much more weak. I'm so much less able to perform mentally, right? Not to mention physically.
Totally.
How did they train you to do that?
Oh my gosh. Well,
Because for sure you would have had to train and perform during your...
oh gosh, I don't even remember that being a thing. It's like you just shove a tampon up there and it's just normal.
You keep going, yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's many different tactics, and I was actually catching up with an old coach, and you know, there was a strong Eastern European influence, and I'm not saying this all came from. Is that okay?
It definitely all came from these
okay.
influence.
I don't want to offend.
You don't know it's experience.
Yeah, I don't want to offend.
No, this is a safe space, don't worry.
Fear tactics were very
Right.
often used. You're very often terrified of your coach.
Right,
You know?
right.
And
yes.
unfortunately, it works.
Yeah.
It does work. And I mean, luckily,
Fear is a powerful thing,
oh,
right?
it's extremely powerful.
Yeah.
And it does, I mean, you know, Russians and Bulgarians, Ukraine, they're like number one in the sport.
Yeah.
We did, luckily, I did have a Canadian coach for majority of the training. Our Bulgarian coach went and got like a higher position somewhere. And so she didn't use fear tactics all the time, sometimes when she had to, and it worked. But at that time, yeah, like how did we mold our minds? I mean, I guess in a way, you know, there's a power dynamic, like, you know, your coach is above you, you listen to your coach. And at that level, you are wanting to keep your spot. I mean, I don't know if I'm like, I have actually never thought about that, but I mean, having your mind had to dominate your body. Mm-hmm. So however we learned how to do that, I mean, you're tired, you're in pain, you might be training on an injury, and, you know, you just have to perform. It's kind of like do or die, like you must. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, I don't remember having any actual education on how to do that, but you are just willing yourself to keep going.
Yeah. You just tell yourself that this is what you're doing and that's it. Yeah.
I mean, I remember being so delirious after, like, we would train Monday to Saturday for around, I think, 6 hours a day. And you'd be so delirious, you'd just be laughing because you're so tired. You're just beyond exhaustion.
Yeah.
Right. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Okay, I think so. Yeah. It's mind over everything.
It is.
Right.
It's a mental
fear.
game.
So if you want to like, if you want your body to perform, find something to be afraid of. That if you don't perform, you're fucked. That is how you do it.
Honestly, I mean, that's a really,
It works. It really works. I saw a friend of mine post recently, like the whole idea of soft parenting. She's like, I'm not a soft parent, and I'm not afraid to say that. Like, I am a parent, a strict parent, and that is it. You know, like whatever works.
Who's to say what's right, what's wrong? I don't know.
Yeah. So going to, you know, having pain and inability in a way, right, to experience pleasure. Mm-hmm. As an athlete, I would presume you were very much in touch with what feels right and what doesn't feel right in your body. Were you?
That's an interesting question.
Because if I'm not an athlete, but I train a lot. Mm-hmm. And if something is off, I feel it instantly. Like just even the slightest little change, I feel it because I know how my body's supposed to perform. And if it doesn't perform well, something's off. Even if you put your mind over it and, you know, you try to convince yourself that you can keep going. So I'd presume you'd be very in touch with your body as an athlete.
I would, in my experience, say no.
No.
From my experience and like where I was as like a young gal, you know, in my teenage years. Because if you had a big injury, like you sprained your foot or something, then you know, you have to address it. But I think all those like little things you're talking about, like, you know, something might be slightly off or maybe there's a twinge somewhere. I mean, for the most part, you are ignoring that. And I would say it's not until like your hip goes out or you pull a groin muscle that you're like, oh, okay, I have to like get this dealt with. But from my experience, I would say I was so armored that I left that sport quite disconnected from my body. I think I do need to add, I was also an incubator baby. I was premature. So my entry into the world was quite traumatic. And I had to armor up as a little baby in the incubator because I was separated from mom and separated from the world. And that's extremely unnatural. So why I'm bringing that up is like having that really intense developmental trauma, then going into my athlete experience left me, I think, quite disconnected and dissociated in my 20s.
Interesting. Did you always experience pain, or is that something that came out of trauma?
Again, great question. And it's, I've really been trying to unpack that in the past 2 years. But my first experiences of sex in my 20s, I remember my first boyfriend, like my body felt like a board. Like I didn't have an orgasm once during that relationship. I did not experience any pleasure during sex, but it makes so much sense given where I came from. Where would I have learned to feel pleasure or open to pleasure? My body was just so armored. And then I did have some pleasurable experiences with some partners, but in my long-term relationship where my partner passed away, that was the first safe relationship I had been in. And once the honeymoon, hormones faded, we moved in together. Sexually, I shut down, and I had no resources or no understanding why. Now I understand why. It's because I was safe and my system was acting quite appropriately to trauma that I experienced in the past that I hadn't addressed yet. And it was coming up in that relationship. Like my body was like, okay, it's safe. Okay, I can like just do what it wants to do, which is be armored and protect. So that is also why I became so obsessed with sex, because I wanted to figure out what the F happened to me and why would I shut down sexually in a safe relationship with a man I love. So that was a big part of my inquiry too. And I, talking to not too many people about it, but some friends, they have been like, oh, wow, like, yeah, can you tell me why? Like, I think it actually happens to more folks than maybe that is common knowledge.
Because not a lot of people want to talk about it.
No, it's embarrassing to be like, I have no libido, or I don't want to have sex with my partner, or, oh my gosh.
Yeah. What's a normal level of libido in your view?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I don't know what a normal libido would be, because I think it's different for everyone.
Okay.
I think also people have different levels of interest in sex and experiencing pleasure. And I don't think that, and that's totally okay. Like some sex is really important to some people and not to others. And that could be for different reasons. But, and I think that's totally okay. And I think, for someone that maybe feels like they have low libido, that might look different to someone else's, what they consider to be low libido. So that's why I think it's tough to say like what a maybe benchmark libido would be, because I think it's super dependent on each person and what they feel is a maybe optimal libido.
Right.
Does that sort of make, I know it's vague. It's a vague answer, but.
Is there like there's what you're saying is there's not a uniform, like this is how you're supposed to feel on any given day? I
wouldn't say so, no.
Is there like a minimum threshold that if you go below that, you should be worried, that you would say?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I would say it's something to be curious about. If you feel like, you're in a relationship, or let's say in your own self-pleasure practice, and you don't really feel like you have an interest or maybe an urge at all to engage on a monthly basis, I would get curious. I would definitely get curious. And, is that something you want more of? Is that important to you? If you want more, like how much more do you want? And then looking at, okay, why? Like, why do you think that is? And there could be many reasons why. Unresolved trauma, big one, high levels of stress, an ability to be connected to the body, stuck in the head, not practicing pleasure, not practicing eroticism. I mean, if you think about there's this saying I like referring to, we are what we practice. And a lot of people don't practice pleasure or like practice being an erotic being. And what I mean by eroticism is like what makes you feel alive and connected to your senses. Like, can you feel the air on your face, and can you feel the texture of your clothes? And I think a lot of people don't really practice that. And then, maybe they get in the bedroom and they're like, oh, why aren't I responding sexually? Or why aren't I, accessing pleasure? Well, we're not really on and off switches.
Yeah.
I think I digressed a bit, but
we're a little too disconnected, I guess, from just everyday like moments of feeling what's around us in a way.
Yeah.
Which is very true because we do a lot of things on autopilot.
Yes.
We don't really take time to like, you said feel your clothes on your skin. And it's like, I don't even think about that unless it's wool and it's like itchy. Then it's like, oh, I don't like this. I need to put on something that's more comfortable. But it's totally true. Like we're not really present in a lot of those things. So that affects your libido, and that affects how you will view or how you will feel in the bedroom.
I think that there is definitely a connection there. Because sensuality, I don't know what the word is, but it's like a backbone of sexuality, being connected to our senses. And if we are totally shut off and not able to, notice maybe more subtle sensations, then, our access to pleasure in the bedroom, I think, will be very limited. And maybe we're only chasing those like high levels of sexual energy or just chasing the orgasm, which is fantastic. Love orgasms, but it does sort of maybe limit the whole experience of getting to the orgasm. What's happening in between? Do we need to have an orgasm? Can we just experience pleasure? And in order, I think, to do this, there needs to be, more experiencing pleasure that's not just about genitals, whole body pleasure, way more exploration, being more in tune to the subtle. And I absolutely think that does impact our experience of sex, our desire to have more of it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think is, because you mentioned a couple of times, when you were past the honeymoon phase and the hormones have worn out, it's a common problem that couples experience. In fact, it's so common that I think, like not a lot of people talk about it, obviously, because, but it happens very often that you start off in a great relationship and you have a great intimate life. And then, whatever, a year goes by, 2 years go by, and it just fades away. How do you deal with that? Is it just because we become lazy? Is it because, like I heard that, when we're with our partner and we feel safe, our brain releases oxytocin. So if you feel sleepy when you're spending time with your partner, that's actually not a bad thing. It means that you're feeling safe with them. But at what point, does that become a problem? And how do you, like, where do you start? Mm-hmm. If you feel like, okay, well, I'm not feeling as maybe passionate anymore. Our bedroom life is not as exciting as it used to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots to say there. Because it is inevitable. And it might happen at different times for different couples, like when those like natural high of the honeymoon fades away.
Can it happen that it doesn't fade away? Like, is it possible?
I mean, I definitely don't want to say like it is or it isn't, because I think it's really different for each couple. I mean,
there are some, I have a friend in particular who I'm thinking about right now, for whom like it feels like that's their whole life. Like it feels like it's their hobby. Like they
well,
have
there you
sex
go.
every single day. And
that's
like,
wild.
What?
Not wild.
They have full-time jobs.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, there you go. I think it just depends because,
But it's common. It's very common that
very common.
The opposite happens. Yeah.
Right. And I think there's many reasons for that. Well, yeah, you don't get the natural high of the hormones that are released when you first fall in love. So those fade. Now maybe you've moved in with them. It's really easy to get quite desensitized to each other. And it is to fall into routines. You said the word lazy. I think that's a fair comment, very habitual.
Yeah.
Stop getting curious about each other.
And stop putting in any effort.
Stop putting in any effort. And then I think what happens is because during the honeymoon phase, sex kind of just happens. You're not really thinking about it.
Yeah.
It just like happens. And so now, well, it's not just happening anymore. And that is, excuse me, I think an unhelpful belief in general that sex just happens. No, it doesn't. You're two entirely different beings with two potentially different erotic templates with different turn-ons, turn-offs. You're going to have to talk about it eventually, or maybe get a little bit curious of like, okay, so yeah, like we've noticed that, you know, maybe sex isn't happening as much as we used to. There's maybe a lack of interest from both sides. I think step one is we got to have some conversations and potentially, I think it, you know, bring a third party in, therapy wise.
Yeah.
I just realized that sounded like, I mean, or if it's your thing.
We should just end it there.
Yeah,
Bring a third party in.
That's great. I'm not saying that wouldn't work. I don't know. Maybe. You know,
so good.
seeing a sex or I mean, you can't even write that. That just flew out of my mouth, you know. Or yes, so would be maybe a good time to get support, right?
Yeah.
Like see a sex therapist or a sex coach or, you know, ... whoever would be supportive in that space. But this is when you do need to start talking about it and talking about maybe why. Like, let's start with the why. Are we not interested in sex anymore? And, you know, a lot of the times too, it's like coming back to that aliveness and how alive are you both feeling in your life? How alive are you feeling together? And start also looking at your life and the quality of your connection that doesn't even involve sex. Like also looking at like what is happening? Like what is the space between us feeling like?
Yeah.
What is the energy? What are we bringing to each other? That's going to impact too our desire to engage sexually.
Yeah.
And then also looking at, you know, what is your relationship to sex, your individual sexuality? Do you feel like you have an understanding of yourself and your turn-ons and your turn-offs and what you like in your fantasy world? Do you have a relationship to that? Because if you don't, and you're just trying to source it from the other person, then that's also not going to be very helpful, you know? Because at this point, you're going to want to be a little bit self-cultivated sexually so you can bring something to your partner because it's not just happening, if that makes
Let's
sense.
dive into that because that's very interesting. So you mentioned so that you don't like fully, and not that you like fully don't rely, because obviously it takes two.
Yes.
But or more or
more,
three. I don't know.
Or three. Yeah.
But let's explore that. I don't even know how to formulate that question, but I want to talk a little bit more about that, like that aspect of understanding what is it in you that cultivates that, and what you are bringing on. Is that about initiation? Is that about like how does that all work?
I hear you.
Because you think to yourself it's about the other person, right? Like, and only about the other person.
Yeah, like you are the one that gives me pleasure, or like you are the one that turns me on.
Yeah.
And that's like another unhelpful belief that I think would be really great for people to look at, because you're effectively just outsourcing your pleasure to someone outside of yourself. But, you know, think about it. Even when you're engaging with someone sexually, like the pleasure comes from you, from your own body on a neurological level. The pleasure is coming from you. It's not, maybe they're helping, they're assisting, but it is coming from you. And I think it can be so helpful to kind of take back that ownership of like owning your own pleasure and taking responsibility for your own pleasure and for your orgasms, and not making it solely their responsibility and all on them. Because I think that can be not the most helpful direction to go in, because, you know, the more we have an understanding of our own pleasure, you know, what we find pleasurable and how to turn ourselves on, be it fantasy, what is erotically exciting, there's a concept called your core erotic theme, which can be really interesting to explore. I can tell you a little close notes what it is. A sexologist, Jack Morin, created a theory, core erotic theme. He states that unresolved or challenging aspects from childhood, that we will eroticize them as an adult to unconsciously resolve them, and they can turn into what's really hot and exciting sexually.
Whoa.
Yes.
Say that one more time.
Yeah. So his theory states that unresolved or challenging aspects from childhood, or just really prominent pieces from childhood, can get eroticized as an adult to unconsciously try to resolve them.
Okay.
Or it's just something that was really like, maybe there was some sensual pieces from childhood. Like it could be anything. I don't know if I'm explaining that right, but I don't want to say it's only unresolved.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, pieces.
What would be an example? So of something that's unresolved, and then if something that it was something that you like felt safe in, or something that was more sensual, or whatever it can be. What would be an example of that?
An example. I'm just gonna give like kind of a really sort of extreme example, so you can get an idea of like how it might work. I'm gonna make this up on the fly, so it might be weird. But for example, let's say as a kid you had this fuzzy blanket that you just loved and you used all the time, and you felt so warm and safe in this fuzzy blanket. And there's just something really special about that fuzzy blanket. I'm making this up again. Mm-hmm. And now as an adult, it's like you maybe actually having fuzzy blankets is almost, you need it in order to experience a super high level of arousal. It's not the best example, but I'm just trying to sort of explain like how a piece from your past, from childhood, gets brought into the eroticism as an adult. And it becomes kind of a main avenue for super high, super hot sexual excitement. So what you can do is draw upon different sensual or sexual experiences from your life, from childhood to, you could do it up to your age now, and see if there's any common threads of what made that really sexually exciting. And when you discover your core erotic theme, it's great because you're like, oh, there's just one avenue to super hot sex when I include it. You know, maybe you bring it in with your partner, or maybe when you're using it in your mind. And so with that, you then have an opportunity, okay, so that's where my core erotic theme is. What else can I explore? So you're not just doing one note every time, if that makes sense. It's one way to start to learn more about yourself sexually and why things maybe are super hot. Because I think a lot of people don't actually know why a certain fantasy or a certain something is really sexually exciting. And it can be actually a source of shame if it's something that makes them uncomfortable. But I will say that there's always a reason. And if you just look back, there's always a reason why something might be tied to our eroticism or a specific fantasy. Or I think I might be going a little off track.
No, this is okay. So, and once you explore that, because the conversation we were having was around this putting full responsibility on like your partner, and looking at them strictly for that aspect of like
sexual excitement.
Sexual excitement. When you're saying that a lot of it, it's probably not all of it, but a lot of it comes from us internally, right?
Well,
or should come from us.
It's helpful. Like in specifically long-term relationships, once the honeymoon phase is done, it's like, because where is it going to come from if you're both in a place where sex isn't happening anymore? So how do we make it happen? Well, we're probably going to have to actually bring something to our partner, create something together, because it's not just happening anymore because we're all high on hormones. So what can be great about understanding more about your erotic landscape and your core erotic theme is you can bring those themes into your sex life. And just having that understanding gives you both a little key on where some super hot sexual exciting content might be to create. And I'm not advocating to only press that button, but it is one button you can press.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Did I explain it okay?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Are there any signs in the beginning of a relationship that it's going to be a great sexual relationship or not? Mine is the obvious, obviously. But like when you're high on these hormones, you just met somebody and you're falling in love, are there certain things to look out for? Like, hey, this might lead into some problems in the future when it comes to our life in the bedroom.
Wow. Yeah.
Or like the frequency of it will go down, or minus the norm, whatever is considered the norm for it to go down once the honeymoon phase is out.
I think that honestly, I think generally when people first fall in love, sparks are flying, and I think it's like I would get curious about that like next phase, because Well, I see what you're saying. I mean, I think some really good qualities to look for is someone that's curious, like a partner that's really curious about your pleasure and interested in supporting you experiencing different kinds of pleasure. I think curiosity is like one of the greatest qualities of being a lover. You know?
So if someone is just solely invested in themselves and they don't really care that much about what you're going to go through during the experience, that could be...
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, maybe that'd be but you know, that being said, anyone can learn. I think folks maybe don't always, like, you know, sex is a skill. It can be learned. You can learn how to be a better lover. And so I think that's why I'm like, yeah, I hear that maybe there could be signs, but also if it's someone you actually really want to be with, and maybe you're not having the best, or maybe there are some warning, or maybe you're like, oh, okay, I'm not sure how this sexual relationship might evolve. I mean, if you really care about that person, there are conversations to be had and books to read and maybe workshops to go to where you can maybe end up having third parties to bring in, where you could end up having the best sex of your life just because you start actually getting curious and actually talking about your pleasure.
I think it's like one of those things where everybody just expects you to be good at it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you're not good at it, or if there's some things that need to be learned, people are so defensive about it because everybody wants to think that they're really good at it, right? Like nobody wants to walk away from a relationship and hear about themselves that like, oh, he or she wasn't good, you know, or whatever.
For sure. And it's so much pressure to put on those first few encounters. I mean, my gosh, there's like maybe nerves, or you don't know the person, and sometimes that could be maybe you know, accelerate or turn on for someone, but I think for some people they might not feel the most relaxed to be themselves sexually. So it is interesting that there's like can be so much pressure on those first few encounters. But yeah, you're right. And I think there's also like a lot of pressure specifically on men to perform, you know, especially when penetration's like the big act. People forget. I mean, you know, I think in our society, again, it's like penetration, sex equals penetration. Or what about everything else? I mean, why is everything else considered foreplay? And then sex is the big act. And I think that can put a lot of performance pressure on people too, if that is what sex is. So I think it can be interesting to think about that too. Like, what does sex actually mean to you?
Yeah.
Is sex kissing? I think to some it could be.
Yeah. What's the leading point to it? I heard this somewhere recently that like foreplay is like what you do during the whole day. Like how you talk to each other, how you communicate, all of those things, they count, right? Because you can't just like flip a switch in the end of the night. And especially if you're working and you have stressors, which all of us do, right?
My gosh.
To think that, you know, you have to go to work and then you have to come home. And then if you have kids, you have to take care of your kids. And then in the end of the night when you're exhausted, you're still supposed to have like this massive amount of libido to perform, you know, and it's a lot. It's a lot of stress on your body, right?
Yes.
It'll decrease it.
Yes.
So when we talk about couples that are in long-term relationships and these, you know, hormones have maybe faded a little bit, what are some things that you would recommend people do to try to maintain some of them? Like, you know, for some, like flowers to me are really important. I need to receive flowers. But is there anything that maybe you would direct people to explore in particular to answer some of those struggles that people experience in long-term relationships?
Yeah, something I was just thinking about as you were talking too is I think something to consider is that you may have already heard of this. There's two types of desire styles: spontaneous desire and responsive desire. And spontaneous desire is, you know, when you spontaneously have a sexy thought, you're ready for sex, or like your body has a physiological experience and you're like, oh wow, like I want to have sex. You see your partner, you're like, wow, they're hot, I want to have sex. And spontaneous,
like it's like an animalistic state, you know, you're
totally
like boom
in it.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening usually in the beginning with couples. Responsive desire is when you respond to cues of pleasure. So you might think, I could be interested in sex. So you put your body in the bed, and then, you know, maybe there's some touching, and then eventually your body is like, oh, I like this touch. oh yeah, I want to have sex. So you're actually responding to what's happening, and then there's a desire for sex. So it's not instant, it's in response to. And there actually are, I don't know the statistics off my head, but there are some statistics that state that a lot of men mainly have spontaneous desire and women have responsive. So it's interesting to know too that if you maybe are feeling like you have no desire, you also might have a responsive desire, and you actually just need more context in order to respond and want to have sex, if that makes sense.
That's very interesting. Does it happen sometimes when men are more in the responsive state?
Oh yeah.
And women are, what if like the woman and the man are both in the responsive state?
Well, that's what I was going to actually bring up next.
I feel like maybe that's how it happens, the disconnect between,
It can.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because in long-term relationship, I think the sex can shift to being in general more responsive. So couples will be coming towards each other in a more responsive place, not actually super turned on, but maybe there's a mental like, yeah, we haven't had sex in a while, or I want to have sex, but my body's not responding, right? Because of everyday life, stress, just the context of where the relationship's at, where their lives are at. And I think what can be supportive, I'm not suggesting scheduling sex because it can be really polarizing.
I was gonna ask you about this. I was gonna ask you. I have a friend who like does that, and I'm like,
well,
you what? She's literally like, yeah, and then we're gonna meet, and at 6 p.m. tonight we're gonna have sex.
I love that actually.
And I'm like, excuse me? But you know what's so funny? The first time I heard that, I had like my work schedule was all over, and then I worked in the corporate world for a while. And I remember sitting in my chair at work in the office, and I was like, damn, that kind of makes sense. You know what I mean? Because totally. Sometimes your life gets so in the way, and maybe it's unnatural, probably. But sometimes it's like, well, in order for us to like maintain this relationship and put in the effort, maybe we need to think about timing, But anyways, you're saying you don't necessarily suggest it.
Okay, sorry, I should rephrase that. It's not that I don't suggest it, because Esther Perel, are you familiar with Esther Perel?
No,
she is.
I've heard the name though. I feel like
yeah, she's very well known therapist. So she talks about it like, we put going to the gym in the schedule. We put all sorts of different things in our calendar.
Yep.
Why not prioritize sex? Put it in the calendar. So I
put it in the calendar.
Put it in the calendar.
I'm gonna send my husband a calendar.
Seriously, send him a calendar invite. I think it just depends. Some couples might not. Why I said at first I don't suggest it is some couples are like, hell no.
Yeah. It's like it needs to be spontaneous, like what you were saying. Yeah.
But in a way, I'm like, okay, yeah. I think what can be maybe a more accessible version is like planning weekly dates. It's not about sex, but it's about connecting. Potentially maybe about pleasure, massages, reading together, slowing down together, talking, sharing, finding spaces where you're just coming together and connecting and bringing the upregulation of our lives back down to down regulation and creating more context where pleasure can happen and potentially sex is a byproduct of that. I think that's a really big focus, is to start looking at the context of our lives, and are we creating a context that supports pleasure between us, supports pleasure in general, and whatever pleasure means to you. It could be, like you said, receiving flowers.
Yeah.
That's creating a supportive context for you, because then you get flowers, maybe you feel more open to him, to your husband, because you're like, oh my God, like, thank you.
Yeah.
And so I would get really curious about what that context is for each person individually. Like what is important for your system in order that it can actually open to pleasure, different forms of pleasure. That's going to start to change the environment between you, and potentially sex might evolve from that. But so looking at context is one thing. I would reality checking that potentially sex might not just happen right now in this phase as you're starting to reconnect again. So, let's get curious about each other's pleasure, and let's get clear on what our turn-ons and turn-offs are, especially the turn-offs. Because the more we can remove the turn-offs, and sometimes the turn-on just naturally happens. So getting curious about each other as sexual beings, creating supportive context for pleasure. I would start there for sure. and talking about sex, because I think a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
There's like a cone of silence. Like we don't talk about it.
A taboo, yeah.
It's
Well, and
taboo.
it's funny too when it happens in couples, like between a couple, like you're a married couple, it's okay to talk about it, right? And it often happens that people don't. It's just, again, they expect like, well, you should be good at it, I should be good at it, so let's just, make it happen or whatever, without any conversations, without nothing else, right?
Totally.
And I like that you brought up different kinds of pleasure, because it's so true. Like we often interpret it as just like this one thing, but maybe there's a whole other realm of possibilities of taking care of yourself and experiencing pleasure in many other ways, relaxation and all that kind of stuff, right?
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Going back to the subject of reactive and what was the other one?
Responsive.
Responsive.
And spontaneous.
Yeah. So first of all, does it happen? How often does it happen that people just have different sexual preferences? Like for, let's say for a woman, it's important to have sex every day. And for the man, it's important to have sex once a month. I'm going to get flamed online for saying this, because they're going to be like, it's the opposite usually.
Okay.
But whatever, like whatever it is, could that be maybe an issue for some of these couples that are experiencing these declines in their, intimate life? And could it be that maybe both of the partners are leaning, or one of the partners is leaning too much into one of these states, as opposed to maybe alternating? Because you said women usually fall into responsive.
Statistically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of those who have the responsive desire have no awareness of it either. And so when you don't know that maybe you're more a responsive type, you might just think exactly that you have no libido and you don't want to have sex. And I think having that understanding of, I actually just need more context in order to want sex. And there's nothing wrong with that. It is normal. There's clearly two kinds of desire types. I think that might create a bit more understanding of, oh, wow. And like once I start to learn more about what my body and my nervous system and my brain actually want in order to be more open and in a state where it can receive pleasure, then I actually might start wanting more sex. So sometimes it's an education and an awareness piece that's missing. But it's very common that couples might not want the same amount of sex. And there could be other things going on too, like an anxious avoidant dance that's unresolved that's happening. Maybe one person's leaning in and it makes the other person lean out. And there needs to be a bit more emotional safety and security built, where then both people are coming together and the avoidant person can then lean in. I feel like I'm digressing.
No.
Am I answering the question?
You are, yeah,
Okay.
you are answering the question. What was my question about the
different mismatched libido?
Mismatched libido, and then also, it kind of ties into this. So the responsive type, the spontaneous type. And so once you understand what type you are, I guess, it's all about having the conversation and maybe tuning into those. If you have, does it have anything to do, and this is another subject that I want to talk to you about, with polarity in relationships, so like masculine, feminine energies? If women statistically are more in the responsive state, does that mean then that the feminine is more in the responsive state, in the receiving state, and then the masculine is more in the spontaneous, like, let's do this now state? And could it mean, speculating, could it mean if the man is more in a responsive state most of the time, when he used to be, for example, in a spontaneous state, could it mean he's leaning more into his feminine? Like, could that mean that, or no?
It's a really interesting question that I've never thought of. I don't know. I'm going to say an I don't know on that one.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, because I don't want to, I don't want to say any blanket statements that I'm going to realize later I don't agree with.
Yeah. Because lack of polarity can be a really big problem in relationships, or
Right.
misunderstanding as to what energies are more dominant and what the preference is. So I wonder how much that ties into obviously it ties into attraction. Like if you are a woman who prefers to be with a masculine man and the man is in his feminine, that could be a deal breaker. But I wonder how much all of that ties into, initiating, for example, initiating intimacy in the bedroom. Does that mean, you're more in your, I don't think so. I would think a woman can definitely be in her feminine and initiate, right?
Yeah. I don't know if I would, place the masculine, feminine polarity to the responsive, spontaneous. Maybe someone else out there can debate that. I don't know if I would, because I don't know. I think, everyone has different erotic templates, and maybe that does match out with a more, feminine embodied or masculine embodied soul. But again, I think it just comes to getting curious about what your erotic template looks like. And because maybe, I don't know, you never know, maybe someone that does feel more feminine embodied, maybe they do have a part of them that does like being the leader in the bedroom, and that doesn't make them less of a feminine embodied being, or,
right.
all these energies can shift and flow in different ways. And I think the most important thing would be in a coupleship is what was interesting, what does each person want?
Yeah.
Because if let's say the male partner has a more responsive desire type, and maybe she's craving something else for him, then that's a fair conversation to have.
Yeah.
It's a fair conversation around what I want more from my partner sexually is. And having that conversation, I think, is great. That can be very polarizing. But, when it's coming from a place of, wanting to grow more and connect more, it can be really useful information. What do you both want more of each other sexually? Maybe that is a more dominance or more directive energy in the bedroom, and that's fair to want that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you were mentioning, what is that term they use?
Erotic template.
There we go. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Similar to, your core erotic theme. Similar and not similar, but when I say erotic template, I'm speaking to, what turns you on, what turns you off, what brings you pleasure, how, connected to your senses are you, what makes you feel alive, what makes you feel awake, what makes you feel passionate. To me, that's like all encompasses your erotic template. Like, you as an erotic being, like, who are you? What makes you feel alive, passionate?
It's actually a lot more than
just sex.
Yeah. Like, I was expecting you to talk about something erotic, something, but it's about how you feel outside of your bedroom, basically.
Bedroom.
Yeah.
And I think to that point, a lot of people separate, like, there's a sexual lives, and then me inside the bedroom, outside the bedroom. But how we are outside the bedroom impacts inside the bedroom. Of course, there's not, how could you parcel it off? We're not, like, compartmentalized beings. And I think people forget that like how we are in life translates to how we are in the bedroom. Absolutely. There are connecting pieces there. And so that's why when you're, to circle back, when you're talking about libido, it's important. It's not just about sex. Like, how are you in your life? Are you healthy? How's your nervous system? How's your stress levels? Are you eating properly? How's your hormones? Of course. Are you liking the sex you're having? Are you feeling pleasure? All of those things impact libido big time. It's not just about sex.
Right.
In the bedroom.
It doesn't just start there, your level of libido. Okay,
No,
very interesting.
absolutely not.
So an erotic template is an all-encompassing thing.
In my opinion, yes. Yeah, all-encompassing thing. Like, who are you as a human being? What makes you feel alive? Yeah. And what's sexually interesting? What turns you on? What turns you off? All of it.
What if someone likes to go to extremes of, people who are really into, like, they chase adrenaline, they skydive, they are, like, obsessed with generating adrenaline that way? Does that mean that they will then be, like, very wild in, like, does one tie into the other?
I've never worked with a client, but I'd be super curious how that shows up sexually. I'm sure. Okay, I don't know. I don't like saying black or white sentences. I'd be very curious.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
Because I think a lot of people do chase highs sexually, right? And same with, in the conversation around long-term couples, it's like that high kind of goes away, So I think what can be useful is, like, focusing on the warm instead of just the hot. So like, the warm being focusing on the subtle pleasure sensations. And maybe as you start connecting physically, maybe it's not a 10 out of 10 pleasure, but what is the 1 out of 2? Like, what's the 4 out of 10? Like 1 out of 10, I meant. And like start to experience more different ways to feel pleasure. And eventually that might turn hot, but really engaging in the warm together. And so with folks who are just kind of chasing that high intensity, I mean, that's great, but there's all of this other experience rather than just that one shot intensity level. Like there's so much more to experience than that just one note.
Yeah.
So yeah, just be really interested. Yeah.
Do you think that most couples, would that be one of the primary drivers of the problems that they start experiencing, is they chase the high that they got in the beginning and they can't get it anymore because they're not anymore in the honeymoon stage?
I mean, I think that there's something there for sure around not understanding, like why that like deep need to jump each other's bones has gone away for sure. And you're kind of wondering like, where is that? Like, where is that hotness and that fire and that passion for sure? And not having the awareness and the understanding that, well, there might be other avenues to get there, but it's not going to just have that same intensity anymore. Like, yeah, I don't know. I think it can, but I don't think it'll feel like that all the time. I mean,
right. Which is a good thing, because if you're with someone for a long time, I mean, you trust each other so much, and ideally, right? You know each other so well that I feel like it's like in and of itself a great thing, right?
Of course.
To explore that from that perspective, right? Because it's someone you're comfortable with. It's a good thing.
Oh, 100%.
Otherwise, you're just gonna. Otherwise, if you keep chasing that high, I mean, I don't know if you can achieve necessarily. Like you were saying, you can achieve it through other avenues, a certain level of that high that you get in the beginning of a relationship. But otherwise, you would just never keep, or you would continuously keep getting into new relationships and just sleeping around for the rest of your life. Like, that's not very healthy.
That's such a good point. Yeah, it's like, sure, if you want that like hot honeymoon energy, yeah, you could break up with your partner and find someone else, but it's just going to happen again.
Right.
It's just going to, so I think that's where the opportunity is when the shift happens. Okay, now it's time to get curious. Okay, let's get into it,
Do you know Alan Watts?
Yes.
So I recently heard, it was like, I think in the summertime, I was listening to one of his like speeches that he gave somewhere, and he was talking about how when people get into a marriage, they tend to go for that high, and they tend to try to recreate what they had in the beginning of a relationship, which is A, completely unsustainable, and B, unhealthy, because you get together, you enter a marriage, you become, a serious partnership for a certain purpose, and that purpose needs to become your driver, not the chasing of that initial feelings that you had. And I was really surprised to hear that, because for some reason I thought that Alan Watts would think the opposite, but I thought about it and I was like, oh, damn. Like, two people get together for a purpose of, building a family, raising children. There's other purposes at play, not the purpose of going back to what you had in the beginning, because you're not in the beginning anymore. And I wonder if that's why, like, so many couples trip up, because they're like, well, I don't feel, like I'm high anymore when I'm with you. And it's like, you still do. You just have oxytocin this time, right? That's I heard that and I was like, oh, that's so interesting, because so many times, like, the whole thing of like women not being able to like get through a movie, that they fall asleep. And it's like, yeah, I'm sure there's something that just laying down and watching TV does to you that like maybe triggers certain, I don't know, hormones, whatever it is that you feel sleepy. But also I heard that from, I can't remember, I saw a video online. They were saying like, hey, you may feel sleepy with your partner at night because you feel safe with them. And I was like, that's kind of nice, That's a nice feeling, to feel safe with your partner. You feel comfortable.
Yes.
So you feel sleepy.
Yeah, I think that's really sweet.
Yeah.
I love what you shared about Alan Watts, and I think that is like ultimately sort of like what I'm speaking to, right? It's like, yeah, sure, like you said, you can chase that high and that intensity and find it elsewhere. But like, what about like what could happen if you started to get really curious and start growing and learning and like going deeper down the well of what each other might be erotically? Like, what could that look like? And if the purpose is to, one of the purposes of being together is maybe to grow or being each other's allies in healing, well, who knows where you could go when you start to engage in that way.
And if you prioritize it too, right?
Yeah.
Because I think, you know, you and I talked at great lengths in this episode about this, but if you let the outside, you know, circumstances, work, all these things, if you let that in too much, and it's hard not to, because that's a huge part of your life, but you don't realize how low on the priority list is your relationship sometimes, and intimacy. You're like, oh, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, I'm lazy, I'm sleepy, you know? And it's like, well, you had time to go to the gym or you had time to do another thing. It's all about prioritizing and effort.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Intention. Yeah, just creating that intention, right? Exactly. That's it. Yeah, exactly. It's really well put.
For those who are listening right now, we're at our time here, but if, you know, if somebody's listening and they're very curious about like, okay, well, now like I have this whole thing that I want to learn about myself and how all this operates, where would they start? How could they find you? And just general information on where they could begin this journey of exploration.
Yes.
Especially those who are in serious relationships.
Yes. You can find me at alissahansencoaching.com. I'm on Instagram, alissa.hansen. You can find me there. I post a lot on Instagram, and I have some more information about my coaching offers on my website as well.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Alissa. This was a blast.
Oh, thank you. That was great. Thank you so much for having me on.
And thank you to our wonderful listeners for tuning into this episode. I will see you next week.